Hi there, folks. I'm Dara Star Tucker, and welcome to the All Over the Place podcast. Really excited to have you here today. This week's episode is the third part of a three-part conversation with the wonderful creator, Garrison Hayes. We had sort of a sweeping conversation about Black Christianity, about our place in the church, about our journey through the deconstruction experience. Garrison is a wealth of knowledge and experiences, and I so enjoyed this conversation with him, and I know you will too. Just have a couple of quick thoughts before I send you over to the episode that, of course, is being done in conjunction with KJLH, the radio station that I work for in Southern California. I want to remind you really quickly that one of the best ways that you can support this podcast is by going to patreon.com/Dara Star Tucker. That's Dara with one R and Star with two, and signing up to become a patron. Patreon has switched things up just a little bit, not even something that we necessarily asked for, but now you can become a patron without being a paid subscriber. So you can become a part of my Patreon community without paying that monthly fee. Now, there will be a lot of posts over there that will not necessarily be accessible to you, but you will be aware of a lot of what I'm posting over there on Patreon. And if you ever decide to switch over to become a paid member, then you will have access to all of the posts that happen there. So I'm going to start to create some content specifically for the folks who are not actual paid subscribers. So the idea is to build up much more of a community over there. I had a conversation recently with a mutual of mine who talked about how much different it is to build a community that's there specifically for you versus the sort of all-call environment of social media. So hopefully as time moves on, we'll start to have more conversations there in that space where we know that we're surrounded by like-minded people. So head over to the Patreon if you can and sign up as a paid subscriber, as an unpaid subscriber. Either way, I would like to lock in with you over on my Patreon. I also want to remind you to rate and review this podcast. It makes a big difference in how we show up in the rankings. If you are benefiting from these weekly podcasts, that is a great way to let me know. Make sure you leave a rating, hopefully a 5-star rating, and a little review. 1 or 2 sentences, doesn't have to be anything major, but it's one of the things that helps other people to find the podcast. So please do that if you are able. And then the last thing I'll remind you of is that I will be performing in Philadelphia on July 21st at a place called South Jazz Kitchen. The tickets are available now. I said you all would be the first ones to know when the tickets were available. The tickets are up now at southjazzkitchen.com. So I have 2 shows there on Sunday, July 21st, one at 6 p.m. and one at 8:30 p.m. So go to southjazzkitchen.com. You'll have to do a little bit of clicking around. It's not exactly efficient the way they have it set up, but just go to the jazz club portion of the website, go to performances or the event schedule, and you will see me for that July 21st performance. Go ahead and get your tickets early. South Jazz Club does tend to sell out pretty quickly. It's a club that has its own following, which is nice. We don't have to work that hard to fill the place up, but I would love to see some folks that are there specifically to see me. So go to southjazzkitchen.com. Get your tickets for that July 21st show. So now I'll send you on to part 3 of the conversation that I had with the wonderful creator, Garrison Hayes. I'm so glad I was able to deliver this mostly in its totality to you all. Be sure to follow Garrison across all social media platforms and enjoy part 3 of this conversation around Black Christianity and deconstruction. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Well, hi there, folks. My name is Dara Star Tucker, and this is The Breakdown. I'm going to send you right over to part 3 of a conversation that I had with the wonderful filmmaker, journalist, and author Garrison Hayes. We're analyzing, dissecting, and interrogating the historical relationship between Black people in the United States and the Christian church. Be sure to connect with us on Instagram at Radio Free KJLH. My Instagram handle is Dara Tucker B, and you can find Garrison Hayes at Garrison Hayes everywhere. I'm going to send you over to this conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Deconstruction didn't even exist, okay? When I really went through my process of what now is referred to as deconstruction, that word for me didn't exist back in 2010, 2011, when I was really allowing myself to be extracted from the hegemonic constraints of the word of faith, charismatic and Pentecostal holiness environments that I grew up in. So we all kind of land where we land. And the thing with that deconstruction process, that I don't even necessarily feel like a person like Mandisa was allowed to go through. And I don't want to speak for her, but I know that as a contemporary Christian singer, her career depended on her being locked in to a certain belief system. So my heart goes out to her in that respect. But I untethered myself on purpose, and I landed where I landed on purpose.
Mhm.
And I wake up every day reminding myself that it is my job to disappoint a lot of people. I disappoint people every day. A lot of my family does not plug in with the content that I do,
Mhm.
because I occasionally do touch on these topics, and my point of view in a lot of ways goes completely counter to how I was raised. So for you, how important, I guess, was it, you having been a pastor, having been a chaplain, obviously having grown up very deeply steeped in the church, how important was it to you to land in a place that said, I still have this connection with my faith. I'm still holding on to some element of my faith. Because for me, this is a very nebulous thing. I do not call myself an atheist. I do not call myself an agnostic. I feel like I do still have that connection to God or to the spirit. I feel like it's there, but that is the only thing that I owe that world. I owe
Mhm.
that world, from my perspective, a connection. And after that, I do not accept any other constraints or constructs or demands to be placed on me. That's kind of where I've landed. I do not accept your insistence that I conform to the constructs. And in some ways, I do still conform to the constructs, but I do not accept anyone's insistence that I
Yep.
conform to the constructs. So when you were going through this process, first of all, when did that process of deconstruction happen for you? Or begin to happen for you, and what were your expectations of? Was there an end goal? Was there an end game where you said, I got to be able to land on my feet? We got to land right back, somewhere where it feels like I have a solid footing in my faith, but I got to be able to ask questions in that process. So what was your, I guess, goal within the deconstruction process, and when did that begin for you?
Yeah, I have a few things to say about this, Dara. Like, I think one, thinking about Mandisa's story, I think it's so important for me to kind of to this point about who we center and how we center certain what Toni Morrison would call the white gaze, right? Like how
Yes.
GAZE, how we
Yes.
center the view,
Important distinction.
important distinction for how we center the way that we're being viewed and who we choose to be viewed by and how we think about those people who are watching us. In many ways, the reason why I make content for Black people with Black people at the center, it is a mental health decision. I have lived a part
Mm.
of my life trying to care about how I'm perceived by white people and in making decisions as a young man to do things in ways that would make white people like me more
Mm.
or be okay. I've gone through that, and it is terrible for your mental health. I think
Yes.
similarly for my queer friends, they've had to make the decision. And it's why, in many respects, gay and lesbian and trans people end up being a bit alienated or choose to separate themselves from their
Mhm.
families is because they can no longer weather a
Mm.
life dominated by what straight people think about them.
Yes.
Similarly for women, it's the brilliance of feminism is that it decenters the male gaze. I
Yeah.
can no longer live my life thinking, as a woman might say, I can no longer live my life thinking about what men think about me.
Right.
I can't maintain my mental health
Right.
and be concerned how these folks so me this is my third deconstruction, okay?
Okay.
My first deconstruction was from my conservative Christian upbringing. When
Mhm.
I went off to college at a conservative Christian school, that was perceived by my conservative community back home to be like the most liberal thing I could
Right.
do. When I went off to from one conservatism to like a little bit further up the spectrum to another conservatism, um, I had to release myself. I had to free myself from the burden of thinking about what my pastor back home thought about me, caring about that. I had to just release that, and it took a bit of deconstructing from that worldview.
Mhm.
When I went to seminary to get my Master of Divinity, I found myself again deconstructing because I was finally engaging with the book on my own, perhaps for the very first time. I was
Mm.
really engaging with the Bible and theologians and other ideas and like this kind of world of thought where people are thinking deeply about what the Bible and ancient Near East history are saying to us today and how they're all interconnected. It was another deconstruction. For me, at that point, it was deconstructing from all the things I thought I knew, all the things that I kind of like, I was just like pulling that apart. And then this final deconstruction was really from my expectations of God, I think, what I thought, how I thought God was supposed to show up for me,
Mm.
and how I thought I was supposed to show up for God. I was no longer feeling this burden to pray because I realized it was a bit obligatory. Like I was just kind of
Mm.
doing it because that's what I was supposed to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel it anymore. We could go down the entire list, but my point is that there was for me this moment of deciding that I'm going to go on this journey, and if God is real, if God exists, that God will go on the journey with me. I mean, the Bible
Mm.
says that God will never leave me nor forsake me.
Mhm.
That's what it says. So if it's true, then I can go on this journey freely, knowing that God is there with me and journeying with me because I'm being honest. I'm
Mhm.
not, I'm being just truthful about where I am. And it seems to me the scripture rewards those who are honest, who are
Yeah.
truthful. And so, okay, so that is all a part of it. And I say all that to say that a part of that last deconstruction was also me almost releasing myself from the burden of carrying what my religious community thought about the way I was going about my life. It's kind of funny. There was like when I left pastoral ministry, there was this kind of like grumbling that like, wait a minute, you're not supposed to leave. Like,
Mhm.
you're not allowed to leave. Like, you're
Mhm.
supposed to be a pastor for life. And like, you have a calling on your life that this calling is really more of a shackling
Mm.
to this religious institution. And I just don't believe that. I just don't believe it.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to live my life with that burden. And so it's absolutely changed my relationship when you know, when I said the most basic thing imaginable, that gay people deserve our respect and are image bearers and children of God, I was like castigated. They were
Mm.
writing articles and making videos calling me every name but Garrison Hayes. A- and I say all that just to I kind of give all of that context just to say that I can't live my life. And I think you would agree. We can't live our lives bound to what these folks think about us. We
Mhm.
have to live truthfully and we
Yeah.
have to live according to our convictions. And those convictions come from a very deeply spiritual place for me.
Mhm.
And when I say deep and spiritual, I don't mean necessarily religious. It is just a part of me. And so for me, where I've landed is that there is some connection to the divine in all of that for me,
Mhm.
but it doesn't have to connect to somebody's, theological creed or fundamental beliefs or whatever the case may be.
Well, I appreciate that. Do you feel like you could have landed anywhere else, Garrison? I mean, do you feel like you could have landed at a place where faith or spirituality did not have a place in your life?
I do think that that's possible. It's in part because I don't know the future. I can say it's still possible. like I,
We ain't done yet.
we not done. So like maybe check in a year. No, I think it's possible. I think a lot of I think a lot of us are I don't want to say driven by, but certainly influenced by our upbringing and
Mhm.
our community. I think I grew up in a particularly Christian context, and all my friends are from college and grad school, which were Christian schools, and
Mhm.
like a lot of that is just a part of who I am from a cultural perspective.
Mhm.
And I look at life. I think when I had this realization a couple of years ago that my inner voice is me talking to God in many ways.
Mm.
It's kind of like a constant kind of prayer when I'm talking to myself and I'm thinking. It's often me kind of engaging with in my mind, the kind of this divine, and so I think it's just kind of a part of who I am. It's a part of the way I'm wired and oriented because of the cultural context that I was raised in. And so, is it possible that I stop identifying as a Christian? Maybe I don't know,
Mhm.
but
'Cause I noticed that you
yeah.
use that title in a little more liberally than even I would, and I feel like I feel like we've landed in similar places. But I don't necessarily like if you want to question whether or not I'm a Christian, that's fine.
Hmm.
It's not an
Hmm.
insult to me. If you want to call me a Christian, if that happens to be the way that I describe myself, then that's just the way that I describe myself. Sometimes it feels very amorphous. It feels like it's very liquid and it's not even the same from one day to the next for me. But I noticed that you are a little more consistent with that label for yourself. So is that important for you to still identify as a Christian?
I think that's a question that I probably need to spend some time thinking about. Um,
Like what makes you a, I'm so sorry to interrupt,
no,
but
please,
I've
please.
also begun to ask the question and started asking the question several years ago to identify as a Christian, maybe, as you said, more of a cultural assignation, which is valid. It's legitimate. But what I do not identify as, and a word that was used often in my upbringing and is still used in the circles and the charismatic and word of faith circles, evangelical circles I grew up in, was a believer.
Mm,
That is the word that I feel that I cannot any longer ascribe to myself. I don't feel I don't want to say worthy, but it kind of is. I don't feel that that is an appropriate word to describe my belief system, my philosophy, where I stand, where I landed after deconstruction. It is not a correct thing to call me a believer. Can I still be called a Christian? Yeah, in a lot of senses. I think so. So I'm sorry. So please continue.
no, that's helpful context. For me, I'd almost swap those and say that, like, I'm almost, like,
Mm,
more inclined toward believer because I
believer.
think I
Wow.
believe that there's a God, right? Like,
Mhm,
I believe those things, and so
mhm,
I think what the difference is here is that I don't have the same kind of cultural connection to the word, or like cultural presuppositions and like kind of like that additional context that's built into the word believer that I think is there for you.
mhm.
It doesn't necessarily exist for me. Believer is
Right.
more of a generic word, whereas for you, believer is kind of more of a specific kind
Very
of
specific.
very, it's very specific. For me, it's kind of like a believer. Generally, we believe in a number of things, right? And so,
Right.
um,
You're a person of faith. You're a person that is able
right.
to connect with faith. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly, and so, I mentioned in the video that I hope people go watch, I mentioned that, like, I'm often very uncomfortable with the term Christian,
Mhm.
less because of one, the word isn't in the Bible,
Mhm.
okay, so let's start there, which means that it's kind of a specific kind of construction. In many ways, it's a political construction. If you were to look into the history of the term Christian, it's definitely connected to this idea of a political power. And so I'm uncomfortable with it because of the way that it's being wielded today in
Mhm.
politics. I don't want to be associated with those folks. Mike Johnson, you know,
Right.
God bless him or
Right.
not, I don't know, but like I don't want to be associated with him, right?
Right.
I don't want to be associated with the Falwells or with that far right evangelical
Mhm.
kind of affect.
Right.
That's not me. And so I'm often uncomfortable with the term from that perspective,
Mhm.
personally.
Yeah. But I think, obviously that has very different the word has very different connotations within the Black community. And I think I would hope that most people understand that Black Christianity is very much its own thing. Do you have any discomfort with being associated with Black Christianity in that same way? I mean, obviously, the people that you named were very much representation of the kind of almost like white nationalist Christianity that has become so popular today, which is wild for me to see, by the way, because these were my people, or these
Mm,
were my people's people.
mhm,
And so to watch them kind of veer down the path that they have since the days of Reagan, like I said, I grew up in the 80s. I'm a Gen Xer. So we had a picture of Ronald Reagan on our wall in school, and we prayed for him every day. Our
Mm.
teacher venerated him. She loved him, and we sent it off and we got it signed. We got the picture signed. And he was just a step below Jesus
Wow.
for the people in my life. Like I said, my parents were not political like that, but growing up in a Christian school and in a church that was very much populated by the kinds of people who now are just completely wilding out in Congress and in the Senate. It's just a very interesting thing for me to see them go down this very nationalistic path that was in its baby stages. It was in its infant stages when I was a child. So I feel like it's a world that I barely recognize anymore. It has morphed into something quite toxic. But for Black Christianity, it's a very different question that we're asking. So do you have your challenges with identifying with what people would commonly perceive to be Black Christianity? Do you have the same discomfort?
That's a good question that I don't think I've thought about in that way. I think I have seen Christianity perhaps more from a theological perspective, more not that I have ignored necessarily the Black church or Black Christianity specifically, but I think my examination of my kind of whether or not I identify with Christianity is more theological and specifically like, do I believe in God? Do I believe that Jesus is the Son of God? Do I believe that he came down and died and rose again?
Mhm.
And, as a like those are the questions that I've been kind of asking more. And so I think when I look at the Black church, I see, I see its flaws but I also see this history of engagement in the community in ways that I
Mhm.
think are powerful and
Mhm.
important. And I certainly identify with that history. I do think that I come kind of in the lineage of those folks who kind of worked in community and for justice, and so I see myself as kind of the fruit of their labor in many ways,
Mhm.
and that's in part because of the way I just think of history. I'm constantly daydreaming in 1963, and like I'm like in 1968 thinking about the times and the movement. So like that's just kind of like how I think, and so I see myself alongside, Ralph David Abernathy and
Mm.
MLK and these people. I'm like, I'm engaging with John Lewis in conversation in my mind. And so, like, all of that is like a part of me. That said, um, I think that the homophobia and transphobia present in the Black church deserve to be called out
Yes.
and
Yes.
are really very present in today's discourse,
Mhm.
in ways that I think are harmful and I make the case that everyone needs a little DEI, right? Like we all need a little diversity, equity, and inclusion. We all got to like challenge our assumptions and
Absolutely.
who we're
Absolutely.
excluding.
That is such a good line, Garrison. I love that. I'm gonna probably start using it.
Good, good, good. Like, and so when I look at, who's being excluded in what environment, changes depend upon who's in power in that environment. And
Mm.
I think about the Black church in many ways. Almost I have a version of the video or the script for this video that we've been talking about where I mentioned specifically that I think black doing an examination of myself and my upbringing, I think the Black church was one of the only places where Black men could occupy a position of dignity and power
Yes.
for much of American history.
Yes.
And so
Absolutely.
you see so many Black men find themselves drawn to it,
Mhm.
until more recent times where Black men could find dignity and prestige and power and
Mhm.
place in other areas,
Right.
maybe hip hop or sports or business or any number of places.
Mhm.
And so the black, but for a long time, the Black church was that only place, only space. And so in many ways, Black men found themselves in these positions of power and did the only thing they'd ever known to do that powerful people do, which was to behave like white men. And
Yes.
so in the Black church, the Black man is the white man, and
Mhm.
sees himself in many ways as this lord over women and children, and the exploitations that we saw in other parts of society from the dominant culture have been mirrored disgustingly and disappointingly in the Black church. It's not everyone. I want to be abundantly clear about that, but it's certainly present and it needs to be examined. And so I say all that to say that, like, there are certainly elements of Black church culture and Black church history that I find to be incredibly, like, important to who I am, and then there are elements that I think deserve the kind of reckoning that
Mhm.
we are pushing for in other parts of society.
Well, your voice is so necessary in this conversation, Garrison, and I could just talk to you. I could just talk to you all day long, but I want to let you get back to your actual life, and so I'm gonna let it land there. But it's just there are very few people I can have conversations like this with, and we connect on so many different levels. It's just
Yep,
there's all kinds of ways to plug in, and then
yep,
there are ways that you really differ from where I stand, and those ways are interesting to have. Those things are interesting to have conversations about as well, just to hear the ways in which we differ on some of the stuff. So I'm still hoping to do this live podcast
I
concept and
know,
get you and a
I
couple of other
know.
people in a room and just sit and have conversation. I've been questioning kind of what my trajectory is going to be. It's like, okay, what happens after this? I'm doing a lot of political outreach and advocacy this year because obviously it is an election year. But what happens after this? It's like, do I see myself in more of the interviewing space? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm that person, but what I do love is this. I love having conversations. I don't necessarily want to be the one with the microphone, but I
Yep,
love sitting down and having a meeting of the minds with people that I find really interesting and just talking things like this out. So thank you for making time for me, first of all, Garrison, and just being who you are and being outspoken in that. And can you kind of, I guess, let us know where we can find you online? Because we've been talking about several of the videos that you did, particularly on Black folks and the church or Black folks and Christianity. Can you let us know where to find those videos?
absolutely. Well, first of all, I am always a better person on the other side of a conversation with the Dara Star Tucker. So thank you
Thank
so
you,
much
Garrison.
for the invitation and spending some time with me and even challenging me to think a little bit more deeply about some of the questions that you asked, which
Mm,
I always appreciate. And I've already,
absolutely.
like, I don't know if you noticed, I took a few notes because I'm like, oh, that
I
might
did-
make a good video. That
Oh, I'd love
might
to see
yeah,
it.
so that was good. That was good. People can find me on, I think the easiest one, wherever. TikTok is at Garrison Hayes. On Instagram, it's at Garrison and then the letter H, Garrison H. And then you can click the link in my bio and go to all of my other stuff. It's all
Mhm.
there. You can find me on YouTube, I believe, at Garrison Hayes as well.
Yeah,
I
YouTube
do,
is more of that longer form content that we've
yeah.
been talking about.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely want to continue having those conversations or these kinds of conversations over there. So highly encourage people to go check me out on YouTube.
Yeah. Well, I hope you all take the time to examine his work. When people ask me, like, "Oh, well, what are some other voices?" or someone specifically asked me, "Who are some Black men that I should?" Garrison is one of the top people that I will tag. Donnell, what is Donnell's last name? He
Uh,
goes by Donnell Wrights.
yeah, it might be right, but definitely Donnell writes
Yeah,
on online.
he's one of the people that I'll recommend and a few others. But Garrison, you're always at the top of my list of recommendations when people say, I love what you do. Then when they say to me, I love what you do, can you recommend other people that are in a similar space? You're the first name that comes out of my mouth.
Thank you.
And so just thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. I hope we get to do this in person
Yes.
very soon. Well, I hope you enjoyed that heartfelt conversation between Garrison Hayes and myself. Garrison is just a well of knowledge and information. He's one of those people who's lived multiple lifetimes in the short time he's been here on Earth, and he's always just such a joy to talk to. If you want to keep up with what Garrison is doing online, you can find him under his name, Garrison Hayes, on YouTube, Threads, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, anywhere where you can find information on interesting topics. Garrison is there. I think you're going to love his content, so please do seek him out. My name is Dara Star Tucker. I want to thank you all so much for joining me for this episode of The Breakdown. I'm looking forward to continuing to talk to you about the issues that matter. Join me for further exploration into these topics the same time, same place next week. And until then, let's learn to shout.